In ancient Miletus, a city on the western coastline of modern-day Turkey, the father of geography was born around 550 BC. It is likely that he grew up with a wealthy background and had an early education that involved reading, writing, and philosophy with a focus on rationalism. If he was a rationalist, that would have been used while he was out on his travels collecting information. But before that aspect is to be determined, it must be noted that there were two Hecataeus, one from Miletus and another from Abdera, who lived over a century later. It is suggested that the actual journey of Hecataeus of Miletus began before 500 BC, as that is around the time of the Ionian revolt against the Persian Empire. But before that, let us begin with his travels, which were described in his book on geography. However, only fragments of that work would make it to this day, a lot coming directly from the Greek grammarian Stephanus of Byzantium, who focused on ancient writings and wrote about the grammar. From those fragments, it was inferred that he visited many cities in Greece and the coastlines of cities along the Black, Red, and Mediterranean Sea. But according to Eratosthenes of Cyrene, Hecataeus did not make any maps. However, this is contradicted by the statement of Agathophoros with Herodotus. It was established that Hecataeus did make a map, but it would have been a template from Anaximander's map, but with corrections and improvements. Because of his detailed maps for the time, the book called Periegesis was the first systematic description of the world. The map itself detailed what he believed to be the world. It contained two main sections, one regarding Europe and the other having a combination of Asia and Africa. Then those sections could be divided into subsections with lands such as Greece, Egypt, and Italy. This book on geography was estimated to have been written around 520 to 500 BC, as there is a reference in his fragmented work about Boriza, which was a Persian city founded by the Persian king, Darius the Great, who came into power around 522 BC. The original map was said to have contained grid lines that would have been like the latitude and longitude of modern maps. Also, it could be seen that at the center of the interpretation of Hecataeus's map, that Greece is always at the center of the world. Another portion in relation to geography was the periplus, and this refers to a voyage about an island or along the coastline. This would add depth to the description of the seas, which would be beneficial if journeying to a city on the shores of some kingdom. In the entirety of Hecataeus's map, there is a massive connecting land that has Europe to the north, Africa to the south, and Asia to the east. The main divider of those lands is the Mediterranean Sea, which separates Europe from Africa, and the Caucasus Mountains that acts like a wall to disconnect Europe and Asia. It also must be noted that in this period not much would have been known about the inland area, such as how far that territory actually expands. So, the lands were rounded out and described as being surrounded by a massive river called Oceanus. From mythology, Oceanus was the eldest Titan that came from Uranus, and he represented the heavens, while his wife Gaia was the mother of the earth. This brings in Hecataeus' second book on genealogies, and in it contains some mythological information that was obtained from his travels. It was designed to detail the chronological mythological history of the Greek heroes. This makes Hecataeus one of the first scholars to skeptically research the ancient tales of Greece. He would have used rationalism to not outright believe in the myths and the gods that were told to him while collecting information. This work also survived in fragments and includes information about Deucalion, who was the Greek equivalent of Noah from Hebrew legends. And with that was a list of his descendants who came after the flood that Zeus had caused onto the world. Another mythological description told was about Heracles, who is the Greek equivalent of the Roman Hercules. Then it continued to discuss his descendants who were called Heraclidae or Heraclid. This mythological aspect went on to be discussed by Herodotus, who claims that, while Hecataeus was in the city of Thebes, he had conducted his own genealogy. This is where Hecataeus' father is named as Hegesander, but as he goes back 16 generations, he proclaims himself to descend from divinity through one of the gods. Regardless of that, he would eventually finish, or at least gather enough information to settle down back in Ionia to compile everything into books. This brings us back to the Ionian revolt mentioned earlier. These rebellions were occurring in the Greek colonies along the coastline of Asia Minor. By 500 BC, the Greek city-states of Ionia were getting swallowed into the Persian Empire, and so they revolted against them. Hecataeus was said to be a voice of reason and opposed the rebellion against the Persians. Hecataeus's plea failed, and the city of Miletus went on to lead the other Greek city-states into revolt. They ended up burning the former capital of Lydia, Sardis, to the ground. King Darius the Great would confront these rebelling cities by 499 BC and suppress them by destroying Miletus. Even though Hecataeus was against the revolt, he did not turn his back on his countrymen and stayed behind to help with the negotiation to reach peace with the Persians. According to Diodorus of Sicily, Hecataeus was the leading Milesian who negotiated with the Persian satrap named Artaphernes. The title of satrap is a Persian word meaning protector, and they were the administrators of whatever region that the king assigned to them. Although the city of Miletus was destroyed in 494 BC, it was able to be rebuilt in another location a decade or two later. It is unknown when Hecataeus died, but it is suggested to have been near or just after the ending of the First Greco-Persian War, when the Persians were attacking Greece directly. This puts the date of death between 490 and 479 BC, but the commonly mentioned year of death is around 476 BC. However, near the end of his life, he would have heard about the counterattack done by the Persians to the Greek city of Athens after they had sent ships to aid Ionia in their revolt. Besides the fragments of his works on geography and genealogies, a lot of this information comes from Stephanus of Byzantium and Herodotus. In fact, this is where Herodotus got some of his influence from, but of course, he went on to be known as a historian, as Hecataeus is called the father of geography. Herodotus is called the father of history. Overall, Hecataeus saw the world in a comparable way to the previous Milesian and went on to travel the world as depicted here. So, from the maps of Anaximander, Hecataeus crafted his own and left behind gathered information for later people to build and enhance upon.